أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين وبعد. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, إن خير الأمور أوسطها أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. He said that the best of affairs are those affairs which are balanced. The best approach to our lives is to have a balanced approach. And this is something which was touched upon over the last few weeks. And Islam is no different from every other area of our life, wherein we have to find and strike a balance. And this is a theme which runs concurrently throughout the various texts of Islam and the books of the ulama of Islam, those who have formulated for us the framework which is Islam. The ulama have given us a formulation which is balanced, and they have highlighted the areas wherein a person can lose themselves and fall into a lack of balance, fall into what we could perhaps say or use as an extreme. And of course, nowadays the term extreme or extremism, or someone who is practicing Islam with an extreme tendency, it's become a loaded concept. It has a political connotation attached to it. And that's not what I'm referring to here. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْغُلُوفِ الدِّينِ فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ الْغُلُوفِ الدِّينِ. He said, be wary of being extreme in the deen. Extreme in application of the deen. For that which has destroyed those who came before you is an extreme application of the deen. And of course the ulama, they explain what this means. And the difficulty of our time is to find and to strike a balance wherein we live in a society that has fallen into its own extremes. A society which has fallen into its own extremes, so much so that a balanced person is looked upon as being extreme when really he's in the middle. A person who wants to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and live their life solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and cut themselves off from this dunya, etc., is looked upon as extreme. A person whose heart is filled with Islam and who wants nothing more than to establish that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon this earth is looked upon as extreme. And that's not what the Prophet ﷺ is referring to. That's not at all what the Prophet ﷺ is referring to. We live in a society which has detached itself completely from any concept of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, belief in God. We live in a society which has totally engrossed itself in materialism, in consumption, in feeding the stomach, feeding the private parts, feeding the ego. And so a person who attaches himself or herself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a society may be perceived as being extreme. And we hear stories of young men and young women who begin to practice Islam, who find their purpose in life through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their teachers raise question marks about them and so on and so forth. That is the extreme. That's the extreme. Not the one who starts to practice their deen, not the one who attaches him or herself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, the one who has a problem with a person wanting to live for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake is the one who has fallen into extreme. But what we are talking about is separate from that. We are talking about a serious issue which does occur amongst individuals who are trying to practice Islam. And we can use the term extreme, an extreme application. Some examples will be given. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ. Those who fall into what we are speaking about, an extreme approach to Islam, they fall into destruction, peril. Basically, they destroy themselves. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ الدِّينَ يُسْرٌ وَلَنْ يَشَادَّ الدِّينُ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. That this deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made Islam easy. But not the ease that we see today, wherein a person says, I don't need to pray because Islam is in my heart. No. If Islam was in a person's heart, then they would want to pray. And if they're not praying, they would feel guilty. Not a person who justifies not praying, justifies his sins or her sins. That's not the ease that the Prophet ﷺ is referring to. The practice of Islam has been made easy. Praying 5 times a day is yusr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's ease given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we know, when the Prophet ﷺ traveled to the heavens and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed upon us the salawat 50 times a day, and Musa alayhi salam said, go back, go back, go back until it became 5. That's yusr. That's ease. Banu Israel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, and you will find this with them, they will know this themselves, that for their sins they had to afflict upon each other capital punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that away, that particular law. For our sins, we simply turn to Him and we say, Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayk. Allahumma gfirli, Allahumma tub alay. That's ease, yusr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, the Prophet ﷺ with the miswak, he says, mutahharatun lil fam, mardatun lil rabb. It's something which cleans the mouth and pleases the Lord. Yusr. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Sadaqah puts out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger like water puts out fire. Yusr. Ease. That's the ease the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. In ibadah, there is difficulty. There is going to be difficulty. This life is going to be difficult. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to trial us and test us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this land, this earth, this universe, this dunya as a place of trial, an examination room. So yes, we can expect some difficulty, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the test an easy test. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, everyone will enter paradise. Al-kullu yadkhulu al-jannah illa man aba. Or kama qala alayhi sallam. Everyone will enter paradise except the one who refuses. And the Sahaba, they said, وَمَنْ يَأْبَى يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And who would refuse? He said, مَنْ أَطَاعَنِي دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ وَمَنْ عَصَانِي فَقَدْ أَبَى. Whoever follows me enters into paradise, and whoever refuses to follow me has refused to enter into paradise. He's closed the door on himself. That's the yusr. That's the ease of the test, but it's still a test. But what the Prophet ﷺ here is referring to is where we make the ease, we make the framework, which is moderate and balanced, extremely difficult. And the Prophet ﷺ, he had examples in his lifetime. Some of the Sahaba. One of the Sahabiyat, she tied herself to a pillar in the masjid. And the Prophet ﷺ saw this and said, what is this? And they explained, whenever she falls asleep, the rope will pull her and she continues to pray. And the Prophet ﷺ told them, undo the rope. If any of you is praying and feels tired, sleep. Sleep. The Prophet ﷺ, when he heard some swore that they would never marry, and some swear that they would fast all of the days, and some swear that they would pray all of the nights, he said, this is not my sunnah. He said, I fast and I break my fast. I marry. I pray and I sleep. أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. And shaitan, as we have mentioned many times over, shaitan, he is experienced. He is experienced and he knows our strings, our internal strings. He knows which strings to pull at which time. And he knows what those individual strings look like according to the individual person. And so he will know a person is not going to give up salah. A person will not stop praying if they are attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So rather than telling the person, stop praying, he tells the person, you're not praying enough. Pray more. Pray more. You're only doing the rawatib, pray more. Haven't you heard about the awliya? They used to pray between Maghrib and Isha, between Isha and Fajr, between Dhuhr and Asr. You only pray 2 rak'ah duha, pray 6, pray 8. You don't pray more than 8 rak'at in qiyam. Imam Ahmad used to pray over 300. Until it becomes extremely difficult for a person to practice Islam because these ideals for him or her have now become standards of practice. If I am not praying like Imam Ahmad, I must be a bad person. If I'm not praying extra nawafil, I must be a bad person. If I miss some of my rawatib prayers, I must be an evil, wicked person. That's the plot of shaitan. That's the waswas that shaitan will come with. Wudu. Shaitan will come to a person. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ. He said, oh, to those who don't wash their heels, and some of the ulama say wail is a valley in Jahannam, etc. And shaitan will come after a person's completed the wudu. I think you might have missed a spot there. And this person, because of their sincerity, because of their want for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they go back and they do their wudu again. And then shaitan will come and say, no, your elbow, you didn't wash it properly, etc., etc., until the person cannot pray except that they have to perform their wudu for an hour beforehand. They start their salah, and then shaitan comes to them. You feel something in your trousers? Something happened there. Go and check. And so they go and check. Nothing there. Wudu again, salah again. And then shaitan comes back. This time it felt real. And they go and they come back. Until they can no longer pray, except that they have to pray 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. That's from the trick of shaitan. And a person who takes the deen to this length, to this extreme, will destroy himself or destroy herself. Why? Because it becomes near impossible to practice Islam in such a manner and to live a balanced, normal, healthy life. Likewise with the halal. With the halal, where a person begins to investigate absolutely every single ingredient. Where a person begins to question. It says halal, it's not enough. I want to see your certificate. I want to see the boxes. I want to see the chickens themselves before you cook them. Let me check, are the heads there? Until this person finds it very difficult to eat. They go to their friend's house. I don't trust this person. This person's not practicing. I can't eat their meat. Or they ask at the doorstep, are you sure it's halal? And it becomes extremely difficult. It becomes extremely difficult for this person to live. And what happens to this person after a year, 2, 3, 4? Maybe they can keep it up. Eventually what's going to happen? If you continue to run a race too fast, mentally maybe you can do it, but your body cannot. And you collapse. And this person will collapse. Spiritually perhaps, mentally perhaps, emotionally perhaps. They cannot continue. And it will take them another few years to build themselves back up to being moderate in their approach to Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the deen easy. And we have, unfortunately, and the reality, it's a fact of matter, a reality, a harsh reality. And sometimes harsh realities and truths have to be stated as warning. We have young, and sometimes old, but they're young-minded individuals who now, due to the widespread access that we have to our own images and videos and sounds, etc., they create videos, they give out fatwa, and they say things which make Islam extremely difficult for the average person. Someone starts to practice Islam, they begin to listen to the wrong person, and they become extreme. Extreme. They no longer eat the food that their mother and father provide for them, and they have been providing the same food for them for their entire life. They cut off ties with certain family members. They don't leave their house anymore because of the fitan, and so on and so forth. Some even, they might leave their jobs. They might leave their universities. They say this is all dunya. Why? Confusion. Without dunya, you have no deen. Without a land, you cannot place a table. You cannot have a foundation for a house if there's no land beneath it. Likewise, there is no Islam if you have no dunya to build upon. And yes, there are from our ummah awliya, those who can live in such a manner. They can live in such a manner. These individuals, they are the outliers. They are the outliers. And we cannot try to make such individuals the standard of practice for the masses, for us, for ourselves. And Al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, as was mentioned previously, and I will mention it again because it's relevant to the topic. He mentions many individuals who try to tame their selves, their souls, the nafs. They try to tame themselves through what is referred to by Al-Dhahabi himself as spiritual exercise. And he says that he'll praise them. كان تقيا وليا زاهدا ورعا كان يصوم النهار ويقوم الليل, and so on and so forth. And then he says, in the end of his life, he lost his mind. Why? Because of the extreme way that he tried to tame his self. And then he'll comment, the best of ways is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. The best of ways is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. We cannot do anything after the Prophet ﷺ that is better than his way. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was a worshipper, yes, but he was also a head of state. He was also a neighbor. He was also a father. He was also a nephew. He was a cousin. He was a man. And the Prophet ﷺ, if we go to the seerah, for example, we see he had times wherein the emotions of men were expressed by the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is the best of examples. And if we look, because I'm referring to now about ibadah, worship. This is ibadah, all related to ibadah. Wudu, salah, etc. And don't think that this is just theory. This is reality. Ask those who have lived long enough within the masajid, and they will tell you stories of many individuals who took the deen too seriously. It's serious, but when you take something too seriously, you cannot be consistent with it. If you try to lose too much weight too quickly, you'll end up in a hospital. Likewise with the deen. If you try to lift weights too heavy, too fast, you will break yourself. Likewise with the deen. And if you ask those who have lived in the masajid for long enough, they will tell you of young and old who try to practice Islam, they took it to an extreme and they go back to their old ways. And if the extreme practice of Islam is only restricted to worship, for the person it's a blessing as well as a test. But for some, unfortunately, the extreme practice of Islam, it creeps into theory as well as practice, knowledge as well as worship. An example, a young person starts to practice Islam and he starts to listen to the wrong people, to foolish people. And those foolish people, they start to feed his mind with theories and concepts that are so cut off from reality, you only have to read history to understand how false these concepts are. Such as, if a person does not have the perfect understanding of Islamic theology, aqeedah, they are a bad Muslim. And this is a false concept. Utterly false. How can we tell it's false? If we say that every single Muslim who does not know the theory of Islamic theology, i.e. aqeedah, properly, if we say every Muslim who doesn't know aqeedah properly is a bad Muslim, then the majority of our ummah are bad Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His mercy, would not make something compulsory upon every single individual that would be difficult to attain. There are those amongst us that are strong and that are weak, and that are sick and that are healthy. Likewise, there are those amongst us that are intelligent, and there are those that are less intelligent. And to understand aqeedah properly requires a level of intelligence to the degree that the ulama of the past would test their students prior to taking them on as students to make sure they had the capacity to learn. And so now if we make compulsory upon the average Muslim that which the ulama of Islam before used to test their students for, then we will be making something compulsory which is near impossible to acquire for us as a collective. And through this, you see these individuals, young individuals, because they start to take on these ideas that a Muslim who doesn't know certain components of his theology is a bad Muslim, they start to cut off ties. They start to backbite. They start to slander. They start to test imams before they pray behind them. In fact, you will see some, they even openly proclaim the disbelief of certain individuals within our communities, which is a grave sin and a grave error. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, if I proclaim the disbelief of a Muslim, if I proclaim it, openly claim it, I am going to be questioned about that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah. If I call someone a khariji, for example, I call someone a fasiq, I call someone a mubtadi', I call someone a dal or a mudil publicly, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, I am going to be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about that statement. And those who take that statement from me, I am going to be responsible for them as well. And then you find this young person, or young-minded person, or new Muslim who's old but Islam is new to them. They don't yet know their alif and ba and ta. They cannot correctly recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Yet they are speaking about other Muslims. You may find a person who was a grave sinner yesterday, openly committing major sins yesterday, or last week, or last year, and today they speak about other Muslims as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them a certificate, you are from the people of paradise. That's extreme. And a person who lives in such a manner, they will not be a practicing Muslim for very long. Sunnatullah. And you can read about various individuals. The ulama note them. They used to speak about others and slander others and so on and so forth. And it became too difficult for them. Their hearts became hard. They became detached from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's not unusual to see a person enter into Islam and assume that they are now from a particular group of Muslims who are saved and the rest of the Muslims are going to hellfire. It's not unusual to see a person like that. In a few years' time, they go back to the way that they were prior to accepting Islam or prior to starting to practice Islam. Who takes responsibilities for those individuals? Who takes responsibility for the individuals that start to practice Islam and they then start to assume themselves better than everyone else? Whose responsibility are those individuals? The leaders, the imams, the du'at, the mashayikh. And so if you have young imams, young du'at, old du'at, young mashayikh or old mashayikh, and they are saying such things publicly and encouraging such beliefs publicly, they are responsible for these individuals. If I take it upon myself to teach a new Muslim and I'm not qualified to do so, it's fine as long as I teach them that which I know. The alphabet, for example, how to pray, for example, how to perform wudu, for example. But if I then start to teach them about other Muslims and start to teach them how to judge other Muslims, then I'm falling into a major problem. A major problem. There are two types of sins, just as there are two types of good deeds. The good deed which is personal between a person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as praying. The good deed which is between the person, the Muslims, or humanity and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as learning and teaching, such as giving charity. And then you have sins of a similar category. Sins which are between a servant and his Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I sin at home privately, it's between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not going to be held responsible for anything outside of that remit. But when I sin, and that sin relates to myself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the community, even if I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me, I may be held accountable for the problems that I've created within my community. So when I openly proclaim things about other people, when I make videos and I speak about other people, when I refute other people or I mock other people, or I type something up and leave it online for thousands of people to read, I am going to be held accountable for the eyes that see it, the ears that hear it, and the mouths that regurgitate it. It's not only me anymore. That's extremism in the deen. And a person who takes up an extreme approach to Islam like that will not last. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده صلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. As was mentioned previously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, مَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ وَمَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. This is al-wasatiyya, the balanced approach. That which you have been commanded towards, do of it as much as you can. I.e., if you cannot do anything other than the fara'id, stick to the fara'id. But That which you have been prohibited from, stay clear away from it. Everything. That's the wasatiyah. To work on staying away from the haram. Staying away from the haram means to not place myself where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want to see me. With my body, my tongue, my thoughts, etc. As for trying to increase and trying to make conditional that which is not conditional, etc., whether in practice or in theory, that's only going to lead to my personal destruction. And it can destroy communities as well. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was the best of examples. The Prophet ﷺ, when it came to the munafiqun who he knew in his time, he didn't mention their names. And he only informed one of the Sahaba, and he informed him in confidentiality. Why? Because of the implications of the heads of the munafiqeen, or the munafiqeen as individuals being known. When one of the munafiqun it would have been justified if capital punishment were to be administered to them. The Prophet ﷺ, he said no. Why? Because I do not want it to be said that Muhammad ﷺ inflicts upon his companions capital punishment. The Prophet ﷺ was taken into consideration the communities outside of his own community and the impact that would have on Islam, the message of Islam, and the communities outside of his own community. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ fasted some days and broke his fast on others. He slept at night time and he also prayed at night time. He married. He led in various arenas, political, the battle or battles, etc. Da'wah. But he was also a neighbor, a friend, a servant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to follow in the best of ways, the way of the Prophet ﷺ in al-wasatiyah. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد وارض اللهم عن أبي بكر وعن عمر وعن عثمان وعن علي وعن سائر الصحابة أجمعين اللهم تب علينا واعف عنا واهدنا إليك يا رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.
Jazakallah. Keep carry on.